The Pentagon analysts called it the computer gap, and by 1959, it had American officials terrified. While the United States celebrated its technological superiority in nuclear weapons and jet aircraft, Soviet computing technology was advancing at an alarming rate. The USSR's BESM-1 mainframe, unveiled in 1952, had shocked Western observers with capabilities that rivaled America's best machines. Behind closed doors at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and in classified rooms at IBM's Yorktown Heights facility, American engineers frantically worked to regain the advantage. The Cold War was entering a new battlefield, one where silicon and programming languages would prove as decisive as missiles and submarines. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It's incredible to see our historical community spread across the world. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each subscription helps us continue unearthing these fascinating stories that shaped our world. Now, let's get to the story. The irony was palpable. In 1950, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin had publicly dismissed American computer research as bourgeois pseudoscience and capitalist distraction from true industrial progress. Yet by 1953, as IBM unveiled its 701 defense calculator, Soviet scientists were already reverse engineering American designs while simultaneously developing their own computer architecture. This silent technological race would eventually transform not just military capability, but the very nature of global business, industry, and society itself. Moscow, 1950. Inside a drab concrete building in the Khimki district, Sergei Lebedev labored over circuit diagrams for what would become the BESM-1. With limited resources but formidable mathematical talent, Lebedev's team was determined to achieve computing breakthroughs that would demonstrate Soviet scientific superiority. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Reliable computer systems were becoming essential for nuclear weapons design, missile guidance, and cryptographic applications. While Pravda newspaper regularly mocked America's wasteful investment in electronic computers, Soviet leadership privately poured resources into catching up. Meanwhile, in Poughkeepsie, New York, IBM was undergoing a profound transformation. Thomas Watson Sr., the company's legendary founder, was gradually passing leadership to his son, Thomas Watson Jr. The elder Watson had built IBM into a powerhouse of mechanical tabulating machines, punch cards, and electric typewriters. But the younger Watson recognized that the future belonged to electronic computing, despite his father's skepticism. "These electronic machines are nothing but expensive calculating devices," the elder Watson reportedly complained. "Our customers want reliable business machines, not laboratory experiments." The tension between father and son mirrored America's ambivalence about computing itself. Was it merely an evolution of existing calculation technology, or something far more revolutionary? By 1952, as the transition to Thomas Watson Jr.'s leadership accelerated, IBM would decisively answer this question by launching its first mass-produced computer, the IBM 701. The 701, initially called the Defense Calculator, reflected its primary customer, the U.S. military. 19 units were produced, with installations at Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory, Lockheed Aircraft, and various defense agencies. Each machine filled a room, required constant air conditioning, and consumed enough electricity to power a small neighborhood. Yet its capabilities were revolutionary for the time. It could perform 16,000 operations per second and store data in memory for rapid access, a profound leap beyond the mechanical calculators and early vacuum tube experiments that preceded it. What few Americans knew was that Soviet intelligence had obtained detailed reports about the 701's architecture through espionage. By 1954, similar components began appearing in Soviet machines. The technology transfer worked in both directions. Western intelligence carefully analyzed every scientific paper and technical exhibition from the USSR for insights into Soviet computing capability. This silent exchange of stolen secrets accelerated development on both sides. October 4, 1957 changed everything. The successful launch of Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, stunned American officials and the public alike. Beyond demonstrating Soviet missile capability, the precision calculations required for orbital insertion proved that Soviet computing had reached formidable levels. President Eisenhower immediately called for a comprehensive review of American scientific education and research priorities. Computing technology suddenly moved from a specialized military concern to a national priority with broad public support. Thomas Watson Jr. recognized the opportunity immediately. Within weeks of Sputnik's launch, he accelerated development of what would become the IBM 7090, a fully transistorized mainframe computer far more powerful than previous vacuum tube models. In a bold move, he also directed IBM to significantly expand its research division, recruiting top talent from academia and competing firms. Inside IBM's labs, a new generation of engineers was reimagining what computers could accomplish. John Backus led the development of Fortran, the first widely used high-level programming language, which dramatically simplified the process of creating software. Gene Amdahl designed computer architectures that would define mainframe computing for decades. These innovations were not merely technical achievements. They represented a fundamental shift in IBM's business strategy toward scientific computing rather than just business applications. The Soviet response was equally determined. In 1958, Sergei Lebedev unveiled the BESM-2, a significantly improved mainframe that demonstrated impressive performance for scientific calculations. Soviet mathematicians developed new algorithms for everything from weather prediction to nuclear physics. Yet critical weaknesses in the Soviet approach were becoming apparent. While theoretical research was world-class, manufacturing quality and reliability lagged significantly. Soviet computers frequently failed due to component issues, while IBM machines established a reputation for exceptional reliability. By 1959, the competition had escalated further. IBM released the 1401, a more affordable computer aimed at business applications rather than scientific computing. This strategic move would prove transformative. While military and scientific applications drove technical innovation, the real revolution would come through the computerization of ordinary business operations. The 1401 became the most popular computer of its generation, with over 10,000 units installed worldwide. The Soviets, focused intensely on matching American capabilities in scientific and military computing, largely missed the significance of business computing. Their Minsk and URL series computers, while technically capable, were produced in small numbers and primarily allocated to research institutes and military facilities. Few Soviet economic planners recognized how computerization of inventory management, accounting, and manufacturing processes would transform capitalist economies. This divergence reflected fundamental differences between the two economic systems. America's decentralized, market-driven economy created thousands of potential customers for business computing solutions. The Soviet centrally planned economy, with its emphasis on production quotas rather than efficiency or profitability, provided little incentive for enterprises to adopt computers for business functions. This blind spot would have profound long-term consequences. As the 1960s began, IBM's dominance in computing was becoming apparent. The company had successfully transitioned from electromechanical business machines to electronic computers, establishing technical leadership while maintaining its legendary sales and customer service operations. IBM's market value exceeded $8 billion by 1960, making it one of America's most valuable corporations. More importantly, it had established a near monopoly in business computing, with over 70% market share in many segments. April 7, 1964 marked a watershed moment. IBM announced the System 360, a complete reimagining of computer design. Previous computers had been standalone products, with each new model requiring software to be entirely rewritten. The System 360 introduced the revolutionary concept of a computer family, different models at different price points, but all running the same software. A business could start with a smaller Systems 360 model and upgrade to more powerful versions without rewriting their applications. This announcement sent shockwaves through the computing industry and intelligence agencies worldwide. The System TAR 360 was not merely a product, it was a $5 billion bet on a completely new approach to computing, representing the largest private investment in any technology project to that point. Even within IBM, many executives feared the risk was too great. The company was effectively making its existing product line obsolete while gambling on an unproven concept. Soviet analysts initially dismissed the System 360 announcement as capitalist propaganda. IBM claims capabilities that violate fundamental engineering constraints, wrote one Soviet computing journal. These specifications cannot be achieved with current technology. Yet, as the first System 360 installations began operating in 1965, Soviet intelligence agencies scrambled to understand the architectural breakthroughs that made IBM's claims possible. The System 360 presented a painful dilemma for Soviet leadership. Their computing industry had been organized around copying American designs, with entire research institutes dedicated to reverse engineering IBM components. But the System 360 represented such a massive advance that simple copying would no longer suffice. After heated debate, Soviet planners made a fateful decision. They would create their own System 360 clone called the ES-EVM series. This decision, formalized in 1969 with the agreement of all Warsaw Pact countries to standardize on the ES-EVM architecture, represented both an admission of IBM's technical superiority and a strategic pivot to a fast follower approach, rather than independent innovation. While pragmatic, this approach meant the Soviet bloc would remain permanently behind in computing technology, always implementing yesterday's innovations, while IBM moved forward. What Soviet planners failed to anticipate was how the System 360 would transform American business operations. Previous computers had been used primarily for accounting and payroll, essentially automating existing processes. The System 360's power and flexibility enabled entirely new approaches to business management. American corporations began implementing inventory control systems that automatically triggered new orders when supplies ran low. Airline reservation systems could instantly check seat availability across thousands of flights. Manufacturing plants installed computers that optimized production schedules based on current orders and material availability. These capabilities created compounding efficiencies throughout the American economy. Retailers reduced inventory costs while avoiding stockouts. Manufacturers decreased production time and waste. Financial institutions processed transactions more quickly with fewer errors. Each improvement seemed modest in isolation, but collectively they gave American businesses a growing edge in global competition, an advantage that Soviet enterprises, still operating with manual processes and limited computing resources, could not match. The gap became self-reinforcing. American businesses experiencing productivity gains from computerization invested in ever more sophisticated systems. IBM's revenues soared, enabling greater research and development investments. By 1970, IBM employed over 25,000 people in research and development alone, more than the entire Soviet computer industry. This disparity in resources made it increasingly difficult for Soviet technology to keep pace. Yet the Soviet Union achieved remarkable successes despite these constraints. The BESM-6, introduced in 1968, was genuinely innovative in many aspects of its design, particularly in its processing architecture. For certain scientific calculations, it outperformed comparable Western machines. Soviet programmers, working with limited resources, developed highly efficient algorithms that maximized performance on available hardware. These achievements were particularly impressive given the severe manufacturing limitations and component shortages that plagued Soviet computing. By the early 1970s, the divergence between American and Soviet computing had profound implications beyond economic efficiency. As American businesses computerized their operations, they generated vast amounts of data about markets, consumer preferences, and economic trends. This information helped companies respond more quickly to changing conditions and identify new opportunities. Soviet enterprises with limited access to computing continued to operate on outdated information and rigid 5-year plans that couldn't adapt to changing circumstances. The gap was perhaps most visible in semiconductor technology, the foundation of modern computing. In 1971, Intel released the 4004, the world's first commercially available microprocessor. This tiny chip contained 2,300 transistors and performed the functions that previously required cabinets full of electronics. By 1974, Intel's 8080 microprocessor was powerful enough to run small business applications, setting the stage for the personal computer revolution. Soviet semiconductor technology, hampered by manufacturing difficulties and limited access to advanced equipment, fell further behind with each generation. While Soviet scientists understood the theoretical principles as well as their Western counterparts, translating that knowledge into reliable, mass-produced components proved increasingly difficult. By the mid-1970s, the technology gap in integrated circuits had grown from months to years. This period also saw IBM transform from an American company into a truly global enterprise. Under the continued leadership of Thomas Watson, Jr., IBM established research and manufacturing facilities worldwide, adapting its products to local markets while maintaining technological consistency. IBM's international expansion served both business and geopolitical goals by establishing computing leadership in countries worldwide. It advanced American technological influence during the Cold War. Japan emerged as particularly fertile ground for IBM's expansion, despite initial skepticism about whether Japanese businesses would embrace American computer technology. By carefully adapting its approach to Japanese business culture and forming strategic partnerships with local firms, IBM Japan achieved remarkable success. This expansion concerned Soviet analysts who recognized that computing technology was creating powerful business and military alliances that transcended traditional geopolitical boundaries. The mid-1970s brought unexpected challenges for IBM. The U.S. Department of Justice pursued an aggressive antitrust case, arguing that IBM's dominance in computing constituted an illegal monopoly. Smaller competitors like Controlled Data Corporation and Burroughs claimed IBM used its market power to unfairly disadvantage them. This legal battle consumed enormous resources and management attention for more than a decade before the case was eventually dropped in 1982. Soviet observers watched the antitrust case with fascination. The capitalist system now turns against its greatest technological champion, noted one analysis in a classified Soviet technology assessment. This contradiction exposes the fundamental instability of monopoly capitalism. Yet Soviet analysts misunderstood a key aspect of the American system. The antitrust pressure, while burdensome for IBM, forced the company to become more innovative and competitive, ultimately strengthening rather than weakening American computing capability. Meanwhile, a new front in the computing battle was emerging. In 1975, a small Albuquerque company called MITS introduced the Altair 8800, generally considered the first personal computer. Initially dismissed as a hobbyist curiosity, the personal computer concept would eventually transform computing from an institutional resource to a personal tool. IBM initially ignored this market, focusing instead on its lucrative mainframe business and emerging mini-computer offerings. This oversight created an opening for new companies like Apple, founded in 1976 by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. The Apple II, introduced in 1977, demonstrated that personal computers could be accessible and useful for ordinary people, not just engineers and hobbyists. While generating nowhere near the revenue of IBM's mainframe business, these early personal computers hinted at a future where computing would be decentralized rather than concentrated in corporate and government data centers. By the late 1970s, the cumulative effect of American investment in computing technology was becoming apparent across multiple fronts. Business efficiency improved as computerization spread from large corporations to medium-sized enterprises. Military applications advanced rapidly, with computerized weapon systems providing precision that dramatically multiplied effectiveness. Scientific research accelerated as simulations replaced physical experiments in fields from aerodynamics to molecular biology. Soviet leaders received increasingly alarming reports about the widening technology gap. The ES-EVM series computers, despite being direct copies of IBM designs, suffered from reliability problems and manufacturing defects that limited their effectiveness. More fundamentally, the Soviet computer industry lacked the manufacturing ecosystem that had developed around IBM, the network of component suppliers, software developers, and service organizations that made the technology practically useful. This ecosystem represented America's true advantage. While Soviet engineers could replicate and occasionally improve upon specific IBM designs, they couldn't match the comprehensive system of education, business practices, manufacturing capabilities, and market incentives that drove continuous improvement in American computing. This reality became increasingly apparent to Soviet leaders, contributing to growing disillusionment with the economic system among technical elites. As the 1970s ended, a significant shift was underway in both American and Soviet computing strategies. IBM, recognizing the growing importance of software and services, began transitioning from a hardware-focused company to a provider of complete business solutions. This shift reflected the maturing of computer technology. As hardware became more standardized, the unique value increasingly came from applications that address specific business needs. The Soviet Union, facing declining economic growth and widening technological gaps, launched an ambitious program to revitalize its computer industry through targeted investments and reorganization. The Agate personal computer, introduced in 1984, represented an attempt to develop Soviet personal computing, though it was essentially a clone of the Apple II released 7 years earlier. These efforts, while technically impressive given the constraints, came too late to close the widening capability gap. By 1980, the trajectory was clear. IBM had grown to over $26 billion in annual revenue, employed more than 340,000 people worldwide, and dominated commercial computing across the capitalist world. Its mainframes ran the operations of most major corporations and government agencies. Its research division produced innovations that defined computing's future. Most importantly, IBM had transformed computing from an exotic technology into an essential business tool, creating efficiencies that strengthened the entire American economy. Yet even as IBM celebrated these triumphs, the seeds of dramatic transformation were being planted. The personal computer revolution was accelerating, with new companies introducing innovative products that would eventually challenge IBM's dominance. More fundamentally, computing was evolving from centralized systems controlled by institutions to distributed networks accessed by individuals, a shift that would eventually reshape not just technology but society itself. As an aging Leonid Brezhnev received the latest intelligence assessment on American computing capability in his Kremlin office, the document contained a stark warning. The gap between Soviet and American computing technology has become a strategic vulnerability that affects all sectors of our economy and defense. Capability. The Cold War's outcome would be determined not just by nuclear arsenals and conventional military power, but by the compounding advantages of advanced information technology. The next decade would reveal just how prophetic this assessment would prove to be, as computing's impact expanded from specialized applications to the fundamental restructuring of entire economies. The announcement caught most of the industry by surprise. On August 12, 1981, IBM, the quintessential mainframe company, unveiled its entry into the personal computer market. The IBM PC was not particularly innovative technically. It used the same Intel 8088 processor found in other personal computers and ran Microsoft's MS-DOS operating system. What made it revolutionary was the IBM name itself. With that single announcement, personal computers transformed from hobbyist curiosities to legitimate business tools. Corporate purchasing managers, who would never have considered an Apple or Commodore product, immediately placed orders for IBM. PCs. Soviet intelligence officers in the United States scrambled to obtain technical documentation. Initial analysis of the IBM PC confused Soviet computer experts. The technical specifications are unremarkable, one report noted. This appears to be a marketing exercise rather than a significant technological advance. This assessment fundamentally misunderstood IBM's strategy and the significance of its entry into personal computing. IBM wasn't attempting to showcase technical superiority. It was using its business reputation to legitimize an entirely new category of computing. The impact was immediate and profound. IBM sold 40,000 PCs in the first month alone and could not keep up with demand. By the end of 1982, IBM controlled 26% of the personal computer market, despite being a late entrant. More significantly, IBM's design choices became de facto standards. When IBM selected the Intel 8088 processor and Microsoft's operating system, these companies became the anchors of a new computing ecosystem that would eventually eclipse IBM itself. This ecosystem represented a fundamental shift in how computing technology evolved. The traditional IBM model involved controlling all aspects of system design and manufacturing. The PC model, in contrast, embraced a modular approach where different companies specialized in processors, memory, storage, operating systems, and applications. This approach accelerated innovation by allowing multiple companies to compete and improve their specific components while maintaining compatibility with the overall system. Soviet planners, still struggling to produce reliable copies of IBM's mainframe systems, now faced a computing revolution that moved too quickly for their centralized approach to match. By the time Soviet engineers could reverse engineer one generation of personal computers, Western companies had already released newer, more powerful models. The technology gap widened from years to becoming essentially unbridgeable under the Soviet system. The early 1980s also saw dramatic shifts in IBM's traditional mainframe business. The IBM System 370 extended the System 360 architecture with new capabilities while maintaining backward compatibility. This commitment to compatibility became one of IBM's greatest strategic advantages. Customers could upgrade to new hardware without abandoning their existing software investments. By 1983, over 70% of the world's mainframe computers were IBM systems or compatible clones. This dominance generated extraordinary profits. Throughout the early 1980s, IBM regularly achieved net profit margins exceeding 13%, phenomenal performance for a company of its size. These profits funded both massive research operations and generous employee benefits that made IBM legendary for its corporate culture. The company maintained a virtual no-layoff policy and provided comprehensive health care, education, and retirement benefits that established it as the gold standard for American corporate employment. What few outside the company recognized was that this success masked growing challenges. IBM's bureaucracy had grown unwieldy, with multiple layers of management slowing decision-making. Its sales processes, designed for multi-million-dollar mainframe systems, struggled to adapt to the faster pace and lower margins of personal computing. Most critically, IBM's traditional customers were beginning to question the high costs of proprietary IBM systems as alternatives became increasingly capable. Meanwhile, the Soviet computing program faced crisis. Rigid, centralized planning couldn't keep pace with the accelerating rate of innovation in Western computing. Manufacturing quality remained problematic, with Soviet bloc computers experiencing failure rates many times higher than their Western counterparts. Component shortages became chronic as semiconductor technology advanced beyond what Soviet factories could reliably produce. These challenges were compounded by Western export controls. The Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Controls, COCOM, maintained strict restrictions on technology transfers to the Soviet bloc. While Soviet intelligence services managed to circumvent these restrictions through various means, the need to rely on covert acquisition rather than open commercial channels created further delays and complications in technology adoption. A pivotal moment came in January 1983, when Time magazine named the computer its Machine of the Year, replacing the traditional Person of the Year for the first time. The cover story declared, "The computer moves in," acknowledging how thoroughly this technology had penetrated American society. By then, personal computers were appearing in schools, homes, and businesses across the United States, while mainframe and mini-computer systems had become essential infrastructure for major institutions. This ubiquity contrasted sharply with the Soviet experience, where computing remained largely confined to research institutes, military facilities, and certain priority industries. The average Soviet citizen had essentially no direct interaction with computers, creating a growing knowledge gap that would have long-term implications for workforce skills and economic development. The personal computer revolution accelerated through the mid-1980s, with transformative effects throughout American society. Business software like Lotus 1-2-3, released in 1983, gave ordinary office workers analytical capabilities previously available only to specialists with mainframe access. Word processing software eliminated the inefficiencies of typewriters and revolutionized document creation. Computer-aided design software transformed engineering practices, allowing more rapid prototyping and testing of new products. IBM attempted to reassert control over the personal computer market with the introduction of the PC-AT in 1984 and the PS2 line in 1987. These systems offered technical improvements, but failed to recapture IBM's initial dominance. The very openness that had made the original IBM PC successful allowed competitors to create compatible systems, often at lower prices. Companies like Compaq, Dell, and dozens of smaller manufacturers produced IBM-compatible computers that gradually eroded IBM's market share. This competition drove rapid price decreases and performance improvements. The computing power available for $5,000 in 1980 could be purchased for under $2,000 by 1985 and less than $1,000 by 1990. This democratization of computing power had profound economic implications, allowing smaller businesses to access capabilities previously available only to large corporations with mainframe installations. Soviet attempts to respond to the personal computer revolution produced limited results. The Electronica BK series, intended for education and home use, reached production in 1984, but suffered from limited software and peripheral availability. More ambitious projects like the Agate and Poisk systems emerged later in the decade, but achieved only limited distribution due to manufacturing constraints and high costs relative to Soviet incomes. By the mid-1980s, computing technology had become one of the clearest indicators of the diverging trajectories of the American and Soviet economies. American businesses leveraged increasingly affordable and powerful computers to improve productivity across virtually every sector. Computer-aided manufacturing reduced production costs while improving quality. Inventory management systems minimized carrying costs while ensuring product availability. Financial systems processed transactions more efficiently while providing better analytical insights. These advantages compounded over time. American companies that effectively deployed computing technology gained market share at the expense of slower adopters, creating evolutionary pressure that accelerated technology adoption throughout the economy. The result was a virtuous cycle of investment, innovation, and productivity growth that the Soviet system, with its centralized planning and limited computing resources, could not match. The implications extended far beyond economic competition. Military applications of computing technology transformed warfare capabilities. With computerized command and control systems, precision-guided weapons, and advanced intelligence analysis creating significant advantages for NATO forces. The Strategic Computing Initiative, launched by DARPA in 1983, accelerated the development of artificial intelligence and advanced computing applications specifically for military purposes. In response, Soviet military planners placed increasing emphasis on asymmetric strategies that could counteract Western technological superiority. This shift reflected a growing recognition that the Soviet Union could not win a symmetric technology race in computing and related fields, necessitating alternative approaches to maintain strategic parity. The personal computing revolution reached a new phase with the introduction of the Apple Macintosh in 1984. Its graphical user interface, though initially dismissed by IBM as unnecessary, represented the future direction of computing, making technology accessible to non-specialists through intuitive visual interfaces rather than cryptic command lines. Microsoft would later adopt this approach with Windows, which gradually evolved from a simple graphical shell to a complete operating system that would eventually dominate the personal computer market. IBM's response to these developments revealed growing strategic confusion. The company launched multiple, sometimes competing initiatives without a coherent overall vision. The PS2 line attempted to reassert hardware control through a proprietary architecture. OS/2, developed jointly with Microsoft before the company's relationship soured, aimed to establish a new software standard. Neither initiative achieved its strategic objectives, and IBM gradually lost its position as the defining force in personal computing. This decline coincided with the beginning of significant reforms in the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev, who became General Secretary in 1985, recognized the growing technology gap as a critical vulnerability. His policies of perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness, aimed in part to revitalize Soviet science and technology by reducing bureaucratic obstacles and increasing exposure to Western innovations. As part of these reforms, restrictions on computer access and usage within the Soviet Union gradually relaxed. Cooperative enterprises gained more freedom to acquire and deploy computing technology. Educational institutions received increased funding for computer laboratories. These changes came too late to close the technology gap, but did create pockets of computing expertise that would become important after the Soviet Union's dissolution. The most significant computing advance of the late 1980s was the growing interconnection of previously isolated systems. Local area networks became common in businesses, allowing employees to share files and resources. Wide area networks connected geographically dispersed offices. These networking technologies, while less visible than personal computers, ultimately proved more transformative by enabling new forms of collaboration and information sharing. IBM contributed significantly to networking standards and technologies, particularly through its systems network architecture, SNA. However, open standards like Ethernet and the TCP/IP protocol suite that underpin the Internet gradually displaced proprietary networking approaches. This shift from proprietary to open standards reflected a broader trend in computing that would profoundly challenge IBM's traditional business model. By 1990, the computing landscape had transformed dramatically from just a decade earlier. Personal computers had become essential business tools, with installed base growing from 2 million in 1981 to over 54 million by 1990. Software had emerged as an industry in its own right, with companies like Microsoft and Lotus achieving billion-dollar valuations. Computing had expanded from a specialized technical function to a general-purpose technology that affected virtually every aspect of business operations. IBM, despite losing dominance in personal computing, remained the world's largest computer company, with 1990 revenues exceeding $69 billion. Its mainframe business, though growing more slowly than newer computing segments, continued to generate substantial profits. The company employed approximately 373,000 people worldwide, making it one of the largest private employers globally. Yet beneath these impressive statistics, IBM faced existential challenges. Its cost structure, developed during decades of mainframe dominance, proved ill-suited for the more competitive personal computer market. Its vertical integration, once a source of strength, became a liability as specialized component manufacturers achieved greater economies of scale. Most critically, its corporate culture, built around mainframe development cycles measured in years, struggled to adapt to markets where significant innovations occurred in months. These challenges culminated in IBM's first annual loss in 1991, a shocking $2.8 billion deficit that ended decades of uninterrupted profitability. The company's stock price, which had reached $175 in 1987, fell below $50. Industry analysts openly questioned whether IBM could survive in its existing form, with some suggesting that breaking the company into smaller, more focused units might be the only viable path forward. This crisis paralleled the final dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991. Both IBM and the USSR had been seemingly unassailable institutions that dominated their respective spheres for decades. Both struggled to adapt to rapidly changing technological and economic conditions. Both faced organizational structures and cultural assumptions that impeded necessary transformations. The parallels extended to their computing legacies as well. IBM's System 360 architecture, first introduced in 1964, continued to influence mainframe design nearly 3 decades later. Similarly, the Soviet ES-EVM series, despite being essentially IBM clones, established computing standards that persisted throughout the former Soviet republics after 1991. These architectural legacies demonstrated how early design decisions could shape technological evolution across generations. The collapse of the Soviet Union created unprecedented opportunities for technology transfer. Western computer companies, previously restricted by export controls, eagerly entered newly accessible markets. Former Soviet computing experts, their skills finally valued at world market rates, found opportunities with Western firms or established their own companies. The classified computing research of Soviet military institutes gradually entered the public domain, occasionally revealing innovative approaches developed under resource constraints. This period also saw IBM undertake the most dramatic transformation in its history. Louis Gerstner, appointed CEO in 1993, led a fundamental restructuring that challenged virtually every aspect of IBM's traditional approach. His famous declaration that the last thing IBM needs right now is a vision signaled a pragmatic focus on immediate business challenges rather than grand technological strategies. Gerstner's IBM reduced its workforce by more than 100,000 positions in the early 1990s, a painful departure from the company's historical employment practices. It divested non-core businesses, streamlined management layers, and fundamentally reconsidered its market positioning. Most significantly, it recognized that services, rather than hardware, would drive future growth, leading to massive expansion of IBM's consulting and system integration capabilities. This transformation succeeded financially, with IBM returning to profitability in 1994 and steadily rebuilding shareholder value throughout the decade. By focusing on solving customer business problems rather than selling specific technologies, IBM established a new identity as a technology services company with hardware and software capabilities, rather than a hardware company that also offered services. Meanwhile, the former Soviet computing industry fragmented along national lines. Russia inherited the largest share of research institutes and production facilities, but economic turmoil during the transition to market economics severely limited funding for technology development. Many former Soviet computing experts emigrated to Western countries, particularly Israel and the United States, contributing to a significant brain drain in this critical field. Some former Soviet computing facilities found new purposes. The Zelenograd semiconductor complex near Moscow, once focused on copying Intel designs for Soviet military applications, gradually transitioned to commercial production. Former military programming teams, known for achieving remarkable efficiency with limited hardware resources, found their skills valuable for optimization problems in commercial software development. The late 1990s brought the Internet revolution, which again transformed computing's role in society. The World Wide Web, which became widely accessible after the introduction of graphical browsers like Mosaic and Netscape Navigator, created a global information space that transcended national boundaries. E-commerce emerged as a significant economic force, allowing even small businesses to reach global markets. IBM initially underestimated the Internet's significance, but adjusted its strategy more quickly than it had during the personal computer revolution. By 1997, IBM had positioned itself as an e-business company, helping traditional enterprises adapt to the networked economy. This positioning proved remarkably successful, allowing IBM to leverage its established customer relationships while embracing new technological paradigms. The Internet's impact proved particularly profound in former Soviet states. With limited legacy computing infrastructure to replace, these countries could adopt Internet technologies directly, sometimes leapfrogging intermediate stages of computing evolution. Internet cafes became common in Russian cities, providing public access to global information networks. Mobile phones, initially rare luxury items, rapidly proliferated, creating additional pathways to digital connectivity. By the end of the 1990s, the computing landscape had undergone multiple revolutions. Mainframes, once the definition of computing, became specialized systems for specific high-volume transaction processing needs. Personal computers evolved from standalone devices to network nodes. The Internet transformed from an academic curiosity to essential business infrastructure. These shifts created enormous economic value while rendering once dominant technologies and business models obsolete. Throughout these transformations, IBM demonstrated remarkable institutional resilience. While never regaining the market dominance it enjoyed during the mainframe era, IBM successfully navigated multiple technology transitions that destroyed many of its contemporaries. This adaptability reflected both the company's accumulated technical expertise and its willingness, albeit sometimes belatedly, to fundamentally rethink its approach to changing markets. The former Soviet computing industry experienced a different trajectory. Some segments, particularly those with direct military applications, maintained continuity under Russian government support. Others collapsed entirely as funding disappeared and markets opened to Western competition. A few areas, notably theoretical computer science and algorithm development, maintained world-class capabilities that eventually found commercial applications in the global technology industry. The early 2000s brought further evolution. Computing increasingly shifted from general-purpose devices to specialized systems optimized for specific functions. Mobile computing emerged as a distinct category, eventually surpassing traditional PCs in units sold. Cloud computing transformed delivery models, making computational resources available as services rather than products. IBM adapted to these changes by further emphasizing services and software over hardware. The sale of its personal computer division to Lenovo in 2005 symbolized this strategic shift, acknowledging that commodity hardware production no longer aligned with IBM's core strengths. The company increasingly focused on enterprise solutions addressing complex business problems, leaving consumer markets to other players. This strategic repositioning proved financially successful. By 2010, IBM achieved record profits despite a global economic downturn, demonstrating the resilience of its business model. More significantly, IBM had transformed from a hardware manufacturer to a technology services company that helped clients navigate increasingly complex digital environments. The legacy of Soviet computing followed multiple paths. Russia maintained significant capabilities in certain specialized fields, particularly cryptography and cybersecurity, building on Soviet-era research. Some former Soviet republics, especially Estonia, embraced digital technology as a national development strategy, achieving remarkable success despite limited resources. The programming skills developed under Soviet constraints found new applications in the global software industry, with Eastern European developers gaining reputation for technical excellence. By the 2010s, the computing revolution that began with room-sized mainframes had transformed virtually every aspect of human activity. Smartphones placed more computing power in ordinary citizens' pockets than the massive installations that once required dedicated facilities and specialized operators. Social media platforms connected billions of users worldwide, creating unprecedented opportunities for communication while raising new concerns about privacy and information integrity. Artificial intelligence applications, building on decades of theoretical research, began achieving practical results in fields from medical diagnosis to language translation. These developments represented the full flowering of computing potential first glimpsed in the mainframe era. IBM's early systems, while primitive by modern standards, established fundamental concepts that continued to shape computing's evolution. The separation of hardware and software, the importance of backward compatibility, the critical role of storage and memory management, all these principles, developed during IBM's mainframe dominance, remained relevant in the smartphone era. Equally significant was how computing transformed from a specialized technical domain to a fundamental social and economic force. The early Soviet dismissal of computers as bourgeois pseudoscience had given way to universal recognition that digital technology represented a transformative capability that no modern society could ignore. Nations that had embraced computing early and developed robust digital ecosystems enjoyed significant advantages in economic development, scientific research, and even military capability. This transformation was particularly visible in the divergent paths of former Soviet states. Estonia, which aggressively embraced digital technology after independence, developed into one of the world's most digitally advanced societies, with online voting, digital citizenship, and comprehensive e-government services. Russia, despite significant technical talent, struggled with digital transformation due to institutional barriers and economic challenges. These contrasting outcomes demonstrated how political and economic systems either enabled or constrained the social benefits of computing technology. IBM's journey through this period reflected similar themes of adaptation and continuity. The company that once dominated computing through hardware manufacturing evolved into a technology services firm, helping clients navigate digital transformation. Its research division continued advancing computing's frontiers, with achievements ranging from Deep Blue's chess victory in 1997 to Watson's Jeopardy! Win in 2011, demonstrating ongoing innovation capabilities. Most importantly, IBM maintained its fundamental identity as an enterprise focused on applying technology to solve business and societal problems. The historical irony was profound. The Soviet leadership that once mocked American computer research as capitalist success had unintentionally predicted a key truth: that computing would indeed serve as a powerful instrument of market-based economic systems. The ability to process information rapidly, distribute it widely, and analyze it effectively provided advantages that centrally planned economies struggled to match. Computing became not merely a technology, but an accelerant for institutional effectiveness, rewarding systems that embraced information flow and penalizing those that restricted it. This dynamic played out most clearly in how computing affected organizational structures. Early mainframe systems initially reinforced centralized control, as only large institutions could afford such expensive resources. The personal computer revolution decentralized capability, empowering individuals and smaller units within organizations. Networking technologies then created new possibilities for both centralized coordination and distributed execution. Organizations that successfully navigated these transitions, including IBM itself, evolved into more flexible, responsive entities than their pre-computing predecessors. The legacy of IBM's dominance extended beyond specific technologies to encompass business practices and organizational models. The IBM sales approach, which emphasized understanding client business needs rather than merely pushing products, became standard practice throughout the technology industry. IBM's global research model, with laboratories in multiple countries collaborating on fundamental advances, provided a template for international scientific cooperation. Even IBM's lapses, such as initially underestimating the personal computer's significance, offered valuable lessons about the challenges of managing technological transition. Similarly, the Soviet computing experience provided important insights despite its ultimate limitations. Soviet researchers working with severe resource constraints developed innovative approaches to algorithm optimization that later proved valuable in various applications. The challenges of technology transfer and adaptation revealed important lessons about the institutional requirements for effective innovation. The contrast between theoretical excellence and practical implementation difficulties highlighted the crucial importance of manufacturing capabilities and quality control in realizing technological potential. By the 2020s, the computing landscape had evolved beyond anything imaginable to either IBM's founders or Soviet planners. Quantum computing, once theoretical, began demonstrating practical capabilities that promised to revolutionize fields from cryptography to material science. Artificial intelligence systems achieved performance that matched or exceeded human capabilities in increasingly complex domains. Computing had become so thoroughly integrated into daily life that its absence, even briefly, created significant social and economic disruption. Throughout these transitions, the fundamental pattern established during the mainframe era remained relevant. Computing technology provided compounding advantages to organizations and societies that effectively harnessed its capabilities. The initial Soviet dismissal of computer research as a capitalist distraction proved tragically mistaken. Instead, computing emerged as one of the most consequential technologies of the modern era, transforming not just military and scientific capabilities, but the fundamental organization of economic and social life. The final irony came in how computing ultimately transcended the Cold War competition that initially drove its development. The Internet, with roots in DARPA research aimed at creating nuclear war-resistant communications, evolved into a global information infrastructure that connected users across former ideological boundaries. Programming languages and computing concepts developed in different political systems converged toward common standards and practices. The technical community that advanced computing's frontiers increasingly operated as a global collaborative network rather than competing national programs. IBM's role in this evolution demonstrated both the power of institutional adaptation and the inevitable limits of any single organization's influence. The company that once defined computing became one significant player among many in an increasingly diverse ecosystem. Yet IBM's fundamental values, emphasizing research excellence, customer relationships, and technological integrity, continued to shape its contributions to the field it had helped create. The Soviet computing program, despite its ultimate limitations, similarly left important legacies. Russian technical education maintained strengths in mathematics and algorithm development that continued producing world-class talent. The technical challenges addressed by Soviet computing researchers, particularly in operating under hardware constraints, developed approaches that later proved valuable in embedded systems and mobile computing. Even the ES-EVM program, though essentially a clone of IBM systems, created a generation of engineers familiar with modern computing principles who later contributed to post-Soviet technology development. Looking back from our current vantage point, we can see that computing's evolution followed neither the triumphalist American narrative of inevitable market-driven progress, nor the Soviet expectation of technology subordinated to ideological goals. Instead, it demonstrated how technological development occurs through complex interactions between technical possibilities, institutional structures, economic incentives, and social needs. IBM succeeded not because its technology was inherently superior in all respects, but because it developed effective institutional mechanisms for translating technical capabilities into practical solutions for real-world problems. This perspective offers important lessons for understanding technological development today. The advantages of early leadership in emerging technologies, while significant, don't guarantee continued dominance. Institutional adaptation matters as much as technical excellence. Most importantly, technologies evolve not in isolation but through complex interactions with the social, economic, and political systems in which they're embedded. The computing revolution that began with IBM's mainframes and evolved through multiple technological generations ultimately transcended the specific companies, countries, and ideologies that initially drove its development. It became something more profound, a fundamental expansion of humanity's capacity to process information, communicate across distances, and coordinate complex activities. This transformation, still ongoing, represents one of the most significant developments in modern history, reshaping how we work, learn, socialize, and govern. The path from room-sized mainframes to ubiquitous digital devices woven throughout daily life was neither inevitable nor predetermined. It emerged through countless decisions by engineers, executives, policymakers, and users, each responding to immediate challenges while collectively creating a technological ecosystem of unprecedented complexity and capability. IBM's central role in this evolution stands as a testament to both human ingenuity and institutional resilience in the face of continuous change. As we navigate the ongoing digital transformation, with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and ever more pervasive digital systems reshaping human experience, the historical experience of IBM and its Soviet counterparts offers valuable perspective. Technical capabilities matter, but so do the institutional structures that deploy them. Early advantages provide head starts, but not guaranteed victories. Most importantly, technologies ultimately serve human purposes, and their greatest value comes not from raw computational power, but from how they enhance our capacity to solve problems, create value, and improve lives. The computing revolution that began with IBM's mainframes has evolved far beyond what either American business people or Soviet planners could have imagined. It continues to unfold, with each generation of technology creating new possibilities while raising new challenges. Understanding this ongoing transformation requires appreciating both its technical dimensions and its profound social implications, a perspective that the contrasting experiences of IBM and Soviet computing help illuminate. In this sense, the historical competition between these different approaches to computing has given way to a shared legacy that continues to shape our digital future.